Let's just bring him out. Andy Davis. Andy Davis.
Thank you. Is it working?
This one is.
I'm exhausted. Are you exhausted?
I may have to borrow
Yeah.
We're going to bring out to do the Q&A the moderator, Matt Zoller-Seitz, the editor-at-large at RogerEbert.com. Scott Mantz, the founder of the online LA Film Critics Association. And Roger's partner for a number of years on Ebert and Roper, Richard Roper.
Yeah, all right.
I should sit here.
Okay, so, wow, this is, I'm not kidding, this is probably the 15th time that I've seen this movie just on a big screen. I was obsessed with it when it came out, and it played for months, right?
Those were the days.
7 Academy Award nominations, wins for
Tommy Lee.
Tommy Lee,
Yeah.
who had one of the best acceptance speeches, intros I can recall, right? What didn't he? His head was shaved bald to play Ty Cobb.
To play Ty Cobb, that's exactly right. Everyone said, "What happened to him?" I know it was a stressful shoot, but geez, did he lose his hair?
He actually said,
I
"I'm
did.
not really bald."
Yeah.
But he
Ladies
was
and
accepted.
gentlemen of the Academy, I am not bald.
But it was nominated for Best Picture.
We were up against Schindler's List, which totally deserved to win a lot of awards.
Well, what are you going to do with Schindler's List? But give it 13 Oscars, or I can't remember how many. But I wanted to ask you, for starters, about the Chicago-ness of this movie. Now, Roger...
What the hell are you talking about?
There you go. You got the one-armed guy there, Doc? Yeah. Now, you're from here. You shot how many movies here?
Chicago.
Yeah.
Chicago, not
yeah,
here.
yeah.
I was born on the west side. I was raised in Rogers Park till I was 8, and then we moved to the south side when I was 8 years old. And in an area where Eddie Verdoliak taught Blagojevich how to be a governor. And it was actually, there was a young man in my neighborhood I got to wash dishes for named Dick Butkus.
Now, I had read somewhere that one of the locations in the movie is one that's of great personal significance to you. Is that right? One of the houses that you shot in?
Well, the house where Tommy Lee raids and grabs Eddie Bow, who was a teamster I turned into an actor, who was in South Chicago, right by the U.S. Steel plant. I worked at Republic Steel in the summer. And it was an old area that had been an African-American community, a pocket surrounded by Mexicans and Serbians. This is in the turn of the century when Chicago really became a huge steel plant. And the great basketball players from our high school lived in that neighborhood, Bowen High School. Gene Krupa went to high school.
You know, I want to ask you, the movie opened.
Shout out to Gene Krupa in the house.
The movie opened on August 6th, 1993. When did you start shooting the film? So I believe it was pretty soon.
Well, all I know is I think we shot for like 52 days or something like that. But the big thing was we cut the movie in 7 weeks. Wow. And everybody in Hollywood hated us after that. There were 6 editors. And what really impressed me tonight about the movie was the editing. Dennis Ferkler and Dov Honig and Don Brochu were the main editors, and I'm watching it saying, how do we do it? How do those decisions get made?
Amazing.
You know,
There's almost a musical rhythm to this film, Andy. The action scenes are just so beautifully, shot by you, choreographed so well, but also, as you said, cut, just perfect cut, back and forth throughout the film.
And of course, James Newton Howard, the composer, did an amazing job. Also, I want to pay tribute. I mean, first of all, the producer, my partner, Peter McGregor Scott, died this year. And we did Under Siege together. We did this one. We did A Perfect Murder together. We did The Guardian together. And he was a genius, a Brit who came over and I look and watch the movie and say, how can I make a film again without this guy and without Dennis and a few of the other people?
I want to ask just a bit, to talk about the editing a little more specifically. I'm fascinated by how this movie is edited. And the first, I guess, the opening section of the movie with the murder, the trial, and him being sent to prison is, how many minutes is that? Is it like 10, less?
Tommy shows up 14 minutes into the movie.
14 minutes into the movie. Okay, that's a lot of information conveyed at a very tight space, and you're jumping all over the place in time.
And we could have made a whole movie with just the opening.
Why did you cut it that way? And also, all the way really to the last third, it becomes more linear. It's more like A leads to B leads to C, but the beginning of that movie is like almost JFK level complicated, the way it's cut. And then all the way, the rest of the way through it, you very rarely stay in one scene all the way through. You're cutting between Tommy Lee Jones and his team doing their investigation, Harrison Ford being Harrison Ford. He's the baddest doctor who ever lived. And this is certainly the only classic action film I can think of that climaxes with two doctors beating the crap out of each other. So that in itself is an achievement. But
my son's a doctor, you know.
Maybe. Well, there you go. But why was it cut that way? A lot of action films now are cut that way. Like all of Chris Nolan's Batman movies were cut this way, but in 1993, action movies weren't cut this way.
Well, there was a lot of information to get across quickly. And what happened was, this is the beginning of electronic editing, and the Avid was, and there's a kid who worked on it who I've got an Avid, and I would work with him, and he had the whole opening, and it just wasn't getting there. And
can you explain what an Avid is for the folks?
An Avid is an electronic digital editing machine. Otherwise, you're cutting film, and you're like a tailor. You put the film around your neck, you make a splice, you sew it together. That's how it used to be. So he had this electronic device, and he was working on it. And one weekend, Dennis Forkler came in on we were working 7 days a week. Anyway, Dennis took the opening, and he put that together, the whole opening of the movie, and it was just magical. You know, how he was able to synthesize and take these little pieces and weave it together.
You know, during the course of production, because it was such I would say a rushed production going from principal photography to its release, there's been a lot of talk about how much improv Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones actually did on the film. Of course, one of the most notorious and most famous scenes of that improv is in the tunnel in the dam when Harrison Ford says, "I didn't kill my wife," and Tommy Lee Jones says,
"I don't care."
How did that scene really play out?
You know, I'm not exactly sure what lines were on paper and which weren't. I really mean it. I must pay tribute to my dear sister, Josie, who's a nurse. I got the script right after Under Siege. Harrison had seen it over the weekend, and I got this call to come into Warner Brothers because he wanted to meet about the movie. And the script that I got had Tommy Lee Jones hired the one-armed man because Harrison had operated on Tommy's wife and had messed up. And it was greenlit, but we knew we had to work on the script. And I called up my sister Josie, and I said, "Joe, I've got the biggest actor in the world. The studio's really behind this thing. What can get a doctor in a lot of trouble?" And 3 days later, she called back. She was a nurse at Cedars-Sinai in L.A. And she said, "What if there's a drug protocol?" So my sister literally came up with the plot. And what's interesting, the drug is called Provasic, which Bruce Gwirtz, who's a vascular surgeon who now is in L.A., came up with that name. But the devil in McGregor is Peter McGregor Scott was Devil in McGregor. And, so that's how he came up with that. So what's interesting, you know, people, I don't know if they remember what this movie's about in terms of the politics of it, but a friend of mine wrote a book about what happened with a drug that Johnson & Johnson was involved in. And this is not too far from the truth. If you've got $1 billion that you can make on a drug, you're going to do everything you can to tell people, don't talk about the bad parts. So it has a message about the pharmaceutical world, which I'm glad as a journalism major here could talk about.
Absolutely, ahead of its time. There's some great moments now when you see the film years later, Andy. Of course, first of all, shout out Jane Lynch. I know some people remember that. My Thornridge High School classmate, Jane, in there, and Julianne Moore, of course, and even the TV reporters. How about that Lester Holt? Whatever happened to him? Did you see him at the end?
And Julianne Moore is not happy with me, because in the original script, she was going to take Harrison home, and there was a shower, and and about 3 days into the movie, Peter McGregor turned to me and he says, "Are you kidding? This week?" And I said, called up Arnold Kolpis, and I said, "Peter's right. This cannot happen." And he had to tell her, those scenes you were going to do with Harrison.
I wanted to go back further if we can, because of course, The Fugitive was this, iconic television series, but it was this kind of, serial thing, and Richard Kimball was forever on the run. So when I remember hearing there was going to be a movie of The Fugitive, I said, oh, it's going to be one of these things where they're going to be tracking him down all over the country, and he's going to catch him in Barcelona or something like that overseas. And there's such brilliance in the choices that were made to have him, instead of running away, actually running right in. How did that all come about?
Tommy and Harrison and I were doing other things in the 60s than watching The Fugitive. Well, Tommy was at Harvard and Harrison was...
Do you even remember what they were?
I was here, or in Chicago at the convention. But anyway, we just wanted to make a standalone thriller. A movie that could stand on its own as something that had these elements of a train crash and unjustly. It's Les Miserables is the basic story,
complete with the storm drains.
Yeah, so it was just about that, and I think that it was just trying to figure out how to make it real. I mean, we were literally improvising all the time, and what's nice about that, usually in a movie you don't have the time to do that. Here are the pages, you've got so many pages to get done, and they're looking at the clock, how many shots did you get? So we knew what the basic elements had to be in terms of telling the story every day. So we would go in, and we would rehearse, and people would come up with ideas, and then the script supervisor would write things down, and that's what we'd shoot. So, actors have a lot to contribute. They work with other great directors, other great writers, and there's more to than being robots to say, read these lines. And so Joe Pantoliano, Joey said, I knew if I stayed by Tommy Lee, I was going to be in the movie. And what's interesting, when he gets hit on the head, Harrison said, oh, he's got to die. There's just no way he could survive that. And Joey's going, Andy, you can't let him kill me, So Harrison drove away and said, bring out Joey. And we put him on the cart. He got $1 million to do the sequel.
I want to ask the other scene that I feel like watching this movie 25 years later on the big screen, it was a beautiful print. And the scene that really got the most applause was the conclusion of the train wreck. Everybody clapped, everybody applauded. Now, how many takes did you get to do, and how much time did you have to set up that shot?
Son, you don't get 2 takes on something like that.
Bring in the second train.
No. Basically, what we did was we found a train track that we could control. It's the 2 sequences that are not shot in Illinois are the train crash and the dam. They were done in North Carolina. And Peter figured out with Roy Arbogast, the incredible special effects man, and Bill Mesa, who did the little bit of the digital work we did, how to push a train without the engines in the locomotive and engineer it to fall off the track. And it was one shot. We were shooting the bus sequence, where everybody's fighting on the bus and all that stuff. And then we finished that, and it was like 3 a.m, and then the sun was going to come up. And they had 25 cameras that we had preset and storyboarded ready, and they said, roll it, and that was it. And what I love about it is the next day, you see that train laying there in the daylight, and the scope of it is there, which today would all be done digitally.
What happened to that train?
Very interesting story. It's now a tourist site. I mean,
where is it located exactly?
In Asheville, North Carolina. But what's really funny, Peter screwed up. He was supposed to give credit to the man who owned that train track, and he didn't. and he sued Warner Brothers. And so the judge showed the whole movie to the jury. Which I think was great. Maybe they'll show all of Donald Trump's footage in his trial. I don't know.
That's the best jury duty of all time, probably.
Yeah.
Let me ask, if I can, about another one of the most famous sequences, of course, the St. Patrick's Day Parade. And by the way, every year I grab a green hat out of a garbage can and try to join the thing. I never get past Lake Street before the cops are on me. I'm like, come on. But obviously that was it was March 17th, I believe, 1992, right? It was the actual parade that, so you joined a parade in progress. The logistics of doing a scene like that with the parade has to be something.
We knew it couldn't end with Tommy being, first of all, there was that sequence where Tommy's shooting at the gate. Tommy didn't want to do that. He said, U.S. Marshal would be shooting in a public place. It was a very tense moment. I was trying, come on, Tommy, it's in the script, do it, And there's a Blu-ray where they say Andy had to cooperate with Harrison, want to do it. I was navigating between Tommy and Harrison about what we were going to do. Anyway, we did the scene, but we knew we couldn't do a French Connection chase after that, right? And when I made Stony Island, I wanted to put St. Patrick's Day in the movie. It's real Chicago. And Daley died. And his funeral is in the movie. And so I said, hold it. It was right around St. Patrick's Day. So I called up Peter and I said, see if we can get permission. He went crazy. Oh my God. And he got a hold of the Plumbers Union and we talked to the city. And we had a Steadicam. They didn't know we were out there. It wasn't anything official. We didn't block the streets or anything like that.
I was going to ask you, that's not that's a real event.
That's the
You're
real
like
deal.
running around, it's like medium cool.
Richard Daley's in there. I think the man who replaced
Roland Burris.
Yeah. So it's the real deal. And then we recorded the music, and then when we were doing the mix, they said, well, the musicians union said, you can't use that music. You have to use musicians to. So nobody could duplicate the sound of that real band in the city of Chicago. So we did something between two studios one day and threw it out and used this anyway.
I want to ask, most of the film, Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones are not in the same shot. And there's like 3 scenes where they're together and they're pretty quick. Yeah. So working with them separately like that, what were the fundamental differences between their styles, between Harrison Ford's style and Tommy Lee Jones's style? How were they different as actors?
Well, it's interesting because Harrison doesn't have a lot of dialogue, And I remember when we were shooting The Dam, we built this. Peter figured out how to take and make a set that could go on a truck, and we swung it over the dam because we couldn't build a set there's an Alcoa aluminum dam. We had to get out of there, and everybody was wired in. And Harrison's out there doing all of his, and Tommy said, he's the greatest silent actor in the world. They both worked really hard, and I'm just sort of blown away by both their performances. And I wish Harrison would have gotten more attention for what he did in this movie. I think he did a great job in this film.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Harrison Ford's performance. Just what is it like directing him? Well, I was going to say in an action scene, but this whole movie is basically one long action scene. Sometimes he's fighting people on subway cars, and other times he's stealing a guy's egg sandwich in the hospital. But there's always something going on with him. What is he like on the set? How do you communicate with him? What did he bring to the character in terms of how he moved, how he looked, and all that kind of stuff?
I don't remember giving him a lot of direction. What you do is you try to create an environment and a setting and have real people around. And he's a very smart guy, and so he's very hands-on. He wants to be involved in all the details of everything. For example, his apartment. We were at dinner, and one of my assistants saw that there was another doctor in the restaurant and introduced, and we went back to this guy's house, and he said, I'll be this guy. And modern art and that, so we really rebuilt that apartment for Harrison, Anyway, he's just very, very, very capable of understanding what a movie takes to make. He's been in front of the camera a lot.
Why does he limp all the way through the movie? Is that written into the script?
No, he hurt himself running away in the beginning when we were in North Carolina. He hurt his knee. He was in painkillers a lot.
So he's all through the movie. He's suffering knee pain, and he's on some kind of painkillers, like the whole.
It was worse from one day to the next, but he was in a lot of pain.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in 1993, the movie made $184 million domestic, $369 million worldwide. Again, this is 1993, 25 years ago. And Roger Ebert hailed it as the fourth best movie of 1993. And he said it is a tense, taut, and expert thriller. Andrew Davis, that's you, paints with bold visual strokes. The movie rises above its action film origins and becomes operatic. Why do you think the film really holds up 25 years later? It feels like it could have been shot today.
Well, I think you care about the characters. You know, I told this before. When we showed the movie for the first time to the studio, it was like 7 people there, including the heads of the studio, and Harris and I were sitting in the back. And when he breaks down in that interrogation, and he puts his head down, and Steve St. John did the great Steadicam shot where he pushes in on him. He kissed me. He leaned over, kissed me, because he realized that his character you had tremendous empathy for him, you know. Yeah. So then when you have Tommy come in the next scene, or a few scenes later, and you've got this mano a mano with these guys that you really care about, you know. I think that's important. I remember seeing Crimson Tide years ago, which was Denzel and Gene Hackman, who weren't huge in those days, but the fact that those two were going to be together going at each other made the movie really strong, and I think that's what this is about.
And this is obviously a film, you know, people we're on the edge of our seats, and it's so intense and so serious, but I thought you also did a masterful job of sprinkling in just enough humor when we needed it, just to let everybody have a chance to exhale in the audience and take a beat almost.
Yeah, well, I think Tommy and Joey Pants and the rest. Another thing, when we first started doing the picture, one of the executives at Warner Brothers said, you know, you don't need all those people around Tommy. Just give him a sidekick, you know. And I said, no, he's going to give him a chance to play and show the spectrum of humanity, you know. And I love watching the ethnic and the diversity in the movie, the racial diversity, which is, you know, where I come from, but also it's the fabric of Chicago that I wanted to show.
I was going to ask you about that also because, yeah.
If I can just jump in real quick and echo that too, Andy. I think that was one of the things where, because of course at first, you know, we think, you know, the Gerard is the villain, but we see early on he tells one associate, "I told you to wear 2 coats," and then another says, "One of my kids is there." You know, he's protective. He's the father figure there, which makes us realize, even though he says "I don't care" in that instance, that he does care and he's going to care. And I think that was a real nice piece of foreshadowing.
He refers to him as my kids. He refers to them as my kids. Yeah. Yeah. But about the diversity thing, I wanted to ask you about. This is something where, like, the more times I see it, the more that aspect of it becomes unmistakable. But that's something where you want to tread lightly around it so that it doesn't become a message picture. Like, it's sort of just embedded into the action. Like, this is the story of a rich guy who basically learns how the other half lives, and it has that in common with the original television show. Can you talk about how premeditated things like that are? Are they things that just naturally fall into place? Or...
Well, I just think, you know, in Chicago in 1992 or 1993, that was the reality of what was going on, you know. And my first movie's about my brother, a white kid growing up on the South Side in a black neighborhood. And I was, you know, I went to Selma and I went to Greene County, Alabama, and all that stuff. It's part of what I wanted to do as a filmmaker, which is to show the world is not, I mean, Look who's at this film festival. You have 3 incredible female directors of color, or more, you know. And think about what was going on. When I was a kid, there were no black people on TV, none. You know, so we've come a long way, and yet we still have a tremendous way to go. And I think the idea of what Roger was so about was images showing the world and having empathy for different types of things and people was, you know, Roger helped make a lot of filmmakers because of his heart and his soul. And that's why we're here.
I wanted to ask you a quick question about the style of the movie. There are a lot of great action filmmakers out there who are a lot more, shall we say, fancy in how they do things. Like and I love some of these people, but you don't do fancy a lot. And in this case, obviously, you're under a lot of pressure. You've got an enormously complex, expensive film to shoot in a very short span of time. But I've seen your other movies, and you're not fancy there either. There's not a kind of a showcase like, let's do this all in one take for 5 minutes kind of thing. You're very efficient. Where does that come from? Where does that way? That's a way of seeing the world. That's just not just a question of what you do with the camera.
I don't know. I see some of the stuff today, and I go, "How the hell did they do it?" You know, I think Haskell Wexler had a big influence on me in terms of documentary filmmaking, hand-holding, making it real, making you feel like you're in the real place. I also think a sense of where you are. You know, falling back and understanding the location. Settings are very important to me. You know, where are you in relation to something else? A lot of people are just all close and all quick cuts. And I think you need to have a sense of geography. You know, it's always important. I started off as a cameraman, and I understand lenses and I think, but it says there are amazing filmmakers out there today. And I watch commercials and I watch stuff on the net, and I go, wow, everything is really well shot. It's expected. You know, in the old days, you used to have some bad lighting in big movies. You know, you had stiff camera work. You know, and so. You know, I don't know. I think it's just I was born at the right time and influenced by the right people.
Yeah, I want to ask, filmmaking obviously is a collaborative process. I mean, you saw all the names, those closing credits. But can you remember a time making The Fugitive when you were working through a scene, again, because they filmed mostly separately, either a scene with Harrison or a scene with Tommy or maybe with the both of them, where you were struggling with the scene or it wasn't really coming together, and just through that collaborative process, you figured it out, like in the moment versus it already being scripted?
Well, that whole scene where he hears the bell ringing on the Balboa Bridge, you know, when he says, yeah, "Oh, I knew we had an elevated train," and all that. That was all created that morning. That was all that whole scene. And it's interesting. The kid at the tape machine is John Cusack's younger brother. And the lawyer for Harrison is John Cusack's father, Dick Cusack. And right behind is sitting is David David Jansen's mother is sitting behind Dick Cusack in the courtroom.
Wow.
She had to show up with the fan club.
Isn't the actor who plays the guy that Tommy Lee Jones relieves of his command at the beginning of the movie? Isn't he? He's on Justified, right? Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of those secondary actors have gotten big parts in television.
It's like a who's who of people later to be famous individuals.
And I believe Ron Dean, who's the one of the lead, he was a Chicago cop, I believe, for years.
No, Ron Dean. No, Joe Casala was the two guys who interrogate Harrison. Very interesting backgrounds. Joe Casala was a Chicago cop who I met when I did Code of Silence, and I put him in almost all my movies. He was a real character. Crazy Joe, they called him. Ron Dean was a kid who, as a young man, was being beaten up by a policeman and went to prison because the policeman got killed. And so I had a cop, a real cop, and a real guy who had been involved in the murder of a cop who had gotten out of jail, sitting there interrogating Harrison. And a lot of other people with interesting backgrounds who had been in and out of prison were in the movie.
The actor who plays Dr. Nichols, I can never pronounce his name correctly.
Jürgen Prochnow?
That's why.
Jeroen Krabbe.
He was.
Oh, Jeroen Krabbe. Sorry. I got my Das Boots messed up.
Actually, Richard Jordan had that part. Richard Jordan started that part, and he got a brain tumor. And he had to leave. And you'll see Harrison we had to reshoot a scene when Harrison has a phony beard. There's one cut that drives me crazy because his beard doesn't look too good. We had to do a quick cut to cover that. But Richard died shortly after. Oh, wow. Yeah.
The reading of the Harrison Ford's pronunciation of Provasic at the end, where did that come from? Is that just something that he burst out with? That's the most offhand, that's arguably the most important word in the entire movie. And he goes, Provasic. Like he can't even stand saying it.
Well, he was loose that night. It was the end of the show. His knee was hurting. I had a lot of trouble because we were shooting at the Hilton Hotel. And Buddy Guy's Legends was right down the street. And so we go to lunch, and we had to get Tommy Lee and a bunch of the Teamsters who were friends, with Buddy Guy. Where are they? Get them out of there. Get them. We got to go back to work. It also scares me because, you see that helicopter. It's dangerous stuff, and luckily nobody ever really got hurt on a movie I did, so.
How many of his own stunts did Harrison Ford do on this? I hear he likes to do a lot of his own fighting, jumping stuff.
Yeah, well, he was doing a lot of it. I mean, there were certain body doubles when he would fall down hard, or but he was there doing a lot of it.
How long into the filmmaking process did you all maybe look at dailies or look at an early cut of the film and when did it finally hit you that holy moly, this movie is really great?
We were about halfway through shooting, and James Newton Howard came out, the composer, and I remember showing him some scenes in our hotel room. And I sort of stood back and said, you know what? I think grandmas might like this movie. Because Harrison had a lot of empathy, and then we had a screening for the sound editors when it was just really crude, and the feedback was really good. So,
I think we might have time for a few questions from the audience. Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, do we have a microphone for folks?
Microphone is coming.
Thank you all for being so patient and sitting in these seats so long.
Question in center here.
You keep talking about it took a long time, or you had to make it very quickly and make all the edits quickly and everything else. Why? Was there a deadline, or who was doing that to you?
The studio wanted the movie for August. It became a sort of a landmark August release because you had a few weeks at the end of the summer and Labor Day, and it was a way to monetize the film. They saw the films and get it out for August, so they were pressing us.
Who's next?
We have another question right in front.
Why did you choose to put a 200-foot tall dam in the middle of southern Illinois?
What did he say?
Can you repeat that?
Why did you choose to put a 200-foot tall dam in southern Illinois?
Why is there a dam?
Why is it? Well, we could have shot it in Cairo, but it's a little flat. Yeah, we just we needed a visual kind of graphic kind of way for him to escape, and it tied in because the train track that we found that we could use that we really wanted was down there also.
Question from the balcony up here.
First of all, I want to tell you that it's the second time I've seen this film, and I enjoyed it very much. I'm glad you verified that the dam scene was not shot in Illinois, because as a native Illinoisan, the first time I saw it, I thought, where the hell is this dam? It's not in Illinois.
All this time, who knew that there was a damn truther movement about this? Validated tonight.
And this is a minutia question, but it seemed to me when I saw the movie tonight, when he grabbed the hat out of the trash can, and then you shot him in the parade, that A, it was not the same hat that he pulled out of the trash can. And I'm getting older, I just want to know whether I'm going crazy or not.
No, you're wrong. The hat he took out of the can was the hat he wore. He may have taken it to the hat maker and had it fixed up in between. I don't know. It was like literally 45 minutes later he walked off the street. So you're right about Carolina, wrong about the hat.
Stickler for continuity. Wait till she sees the wristwatch in Gladiator. It's going to blow her mind.
Do you have anything when you're making a movie where, like, a continuity type issue that you obsess over, and then the movie goes out and nobody even notices it? Or, sometimes people notice things and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I don't think people really care that much. I mean, I suppose if you stay home and go back and forth on your DVDs, you can find things. But as long as they're into the story, and a lot of stuff is screen direction used to be you have to be looking from this side to this. It's all been thrown out now.
Mm-hmm. Question on the floor to your left.
So the question I had.
first of all, it was Dillsboro, North Carolina. It's a Great Smoky Mountain Railroad. It's an excellent thing. I've seen the train. I don't know how the hell you did it, but it was so cool. You did direct Steven Seagal, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I believe, and Harrison Ford, which is the best actor.
Boy, I could take that one, but go ahead, Andy.
It depends what kind of movie you're making.
Better answer. Better answer.
Now, Steven Seagal has become good friends with Mr. Putin, and Arnold's become a great environmentalist, which I'm glad to hear about.
Can I ask that gentleman a follow-up question? What does the train look like? Have you seen it? Wait a second. Give Mike back.
It's buried onto the semi-buried onto the side of the railroad, and when you take the train out and back, you get to see it from two different angles. They won't let you walk down to it, but I'd be crawling all over it if I did. So it was very cool. Yeah. Very cool.
Great. Okay.
Yes, from the balcony.
First of all, thank you for coming. This movie is one of my all-great movies. I remember it from my childhood, so thank you for coming. So the question I have, this movie was a phenomenal success, box office and critically acclaimed. Was there ever an option for a sequel involving Harrison Ford?
No, they did a sequel called U.S. Marshals with Tommy Lee that I did not direct. I was doing a film called The Perfect Murder with Michael Douglas at the time. And so, no, there hasn't been this. I would love to figure out how to get those two on screen together again. I think it would be great. And so I have to figure out how to do that.
One more?
One more question.
Question over here.
This is about Alfred Hitchcock. I couldn't help but feel parts of your movie really were Hitchcock.
North by Northwest.
Really? So my question is, were you strongly influenced by Alfred Hitchcock and the techniques he used?
It's interesting. Somebody was talking to me earlier. When I would see Hitchcock films and I would see the process shots he would do, I knew Cary Grant was not hanging on a balcony. And I was much more interested in sort of the realistic Italian films and where you felt you were really there, and on the waterfront and those kind of films. And A Perfect Murder is a remake of Dial M for Murder, which was not one of his better films. It was a film shot in 3D. It was a play. It was adapted. It was very static. So I would say I'm one of the directors who wasn't that influenced by Alfred Hitchcock. I'm sure I was because, he wrote the book on certain types of cinema and cutting and stuff like that. But it wasn't something that I went after. I think Sidney Lumet and Norman Jewison had greater influences on me.
All right. Well, thank you very much, folks, for coming out to this amazing screening of The Fugitive. Our panel, thank you, and Andrew Davis.
Thank you all.